Hello YouTube, thank you for joining back to my YouTube channel, and in today's video we will learn how to deploy a SQL server using SCVMM. Basically we will prepare an image of Windows 2019 and we will also prepare a Sysprep image of SQL 2017. We also need to make sure that we keep the SQL media located on the local disk and then Sysprep the entire virtual machine. We can use Windows inbuilt tool to Sysprep the image, or we can also leverage SCVMM to Sysprep the entire virtual machine. Once it is done, we need to import it back to the library and then configure a service template. You can see here that the deployment completed within 7 minutes. So it's very fast, convenient, and every SCVMM admin must know how to deploy a SQL using a service template. So let's quickly jump into the lab. Let's see how we can prepare our own image and how we can deploy it using service template. So this is our VMM server, and currently I have one VM running. So we will prepare an image using this virtual machine. So let's quickly jump into the host. Let's connect to the virtual machine. Okay. So first we will attach the ISO for SQL setup. I'm using SQL 2017 on Windows Server 2019. Most of the steps are identical irrespective of the version or SQL version. So I'll go with SQL 2017. You run the setup file, and on the wizard, you need to go under Advanced. And here you will see an option called Image Preparation of a Standalone Instance of a SQL Server. So we'll select that. We'll go next. It will take a minute or two to check the set of files. Okay, so it says prepare a new instance of a SQL server. So that's what we're going to do. I'll accept the terms and license, and I'll select the feature which I would like to install. So it's going to be my database engine service. You can select other options as well as per your requirement. I'll just go with database engine service only. Okay, so we need to provide an instance ID. This is going to be important. The instance ID that we're going to give here, we need to put in the same instance ID in the service template as well. So make sure you remember this instance ID. So here I'll just give any name, demo instance, and I'll go next. Okay, now you click on prepare and it will start preparing the SQL image. So once this is done, you will Sysprep the entire OS and copy the virtual machine to the VMM library. That is one way of doing it. Otherwise, once this is done, you can shut down the virtual machine and you can create a VM template from SCVMM itself. It will prepare the image, it will Sysprep the virtual machine, and then import the virtual machine to its library. That is another way of doing it. So let's go back to the SCVMM server. So for example, if any VM is switched off, you can make a right click, go on create, and then select create virtual machine template. Since this VM is running, I'm not getting that option. So since it's going to take a time to import and showcase it to you, so I have already an image prepared, so I'll use that instead. So let's quickly jump into the service template. So I've created a SQL template. I'll go into the designer and I'll show you the template for SQL Server configuration. So here, this is going to be the name of the deployment. It could be anything. Instance name is the SQL Server instance name that you want to provide, and instance ID. So this is going to be important. So instance ID is the same ID what you provided when you were sysprepping the SQL image. So it has to match up. If you give a different name here, the installation will fail. And you need to provide installation run as account as well. In the configuration part, you can provide a group or a user that can be the SQL Server Administrator group, and the SA password. For this, I have provided the local admin password for SA, and I'm going to use TCP IP for connection. Under service and accounts, you can provide the account name for SQL Server to run. I'm using a run as account, that is my domain admin. so as with the agent service as well. And for reporting, I'm using network services. With that said, you can also use a SQL Server configuration file as well. So if you want more flexibility, more options, and more control over the installation, you can go for configuration file installation. Some options are not available in the UI. You can code it into the configuration file and get it done. So here's my configuration file. You can see the options that I've selected. These are the things that I'm gonna run with. So you can also create your own configuration file and use as per your requirement. So once this is done, I'll also need to make sure that I go to the hardware configuration, click on the SCSI device, and add the VHT which was Sysprep earlier. So this was the one which I Sysprepped. Once this is done, you can push OK. You can click on configure deployment. You can give it a name. It might throw an error because I don't have a resource. So I'll just shut down the other virtual machine before I complete that. Okay, it's off. I'll give a refresh here. Okay, so SQL host is selected. I'll click deploy, and now it will start deploying the SQL Server. Okay, so now you can see the deployment has been started. It will take another 5 or 6 minutes. And once it is deployed, you will see that SQL services and components are already configured. You can also pre-install SQL Management Studio in the base image so that when it is deployed, you will have SSMS to connect and run queries after the deployment. So basically what we are doing, we are also creating a Sysprep image of SQL first and then Sysprepping the entire OS. Ideally, if I install SQL in bare OS and then Sysprep the entire OS, it will break the SQL binaries and it will not work. So it is important to first Sysprep the SQL instance and then Sysprep the entire host OS. So I'll skip through this part. I'll wait for this to complete. Once it is done, I'll show you the components which are installed will connect to SSMS, and I'll show you how it worked. Okay, so as you can see, the service instance has been completed, and now we will go to the VM and we'll see if my SQL instances is now created. So let me take the access. So first we will check if SQL services are up and running. Okay, you can see here SQL service is running and the instance name is my instance. And let's go ahead and open SQL Management Studio. I'll connect to the SQL instance, my instance, and then we'll run a query. We'll check the SQL version installed. So you can see 2017 SQL is installed, and this is fully functioning and worked pretty good. One more thing, let's go back to the SQL Service Template. I'll show you one more important thing which is necessary, otherwise the deployment will probably fail. So when you create a template for SQL Service, under SQL Server Configuration, you also need to provide the setup file for SQL. So when you create the base image, you need to copy the entire content of the ISO and put it somewhere on the local server, and also mention the path of it. So once it is Sysprep, and when you prepare the image after the deployment, SQL needs those binaries for SQL. So you need to provide that locally on that particular server. So that's why I have kept SQL setup already under that image, and path is this. So if I go back to the image, if I check C and the image path, here it is, SQL setup. So this is one thing which really which is quite important, and you need to keep it in the directory, local directory of that particular image. So I think that's pretty much it from my side. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and give a comment. Thank you.